This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
We got a good one for you today. Welcome to Real Talk. It's Jesperson and Hicks with you on this episode. Coming up in just a second, Canada's Federal Housing Minister will join us, formerly the Immigration Minister. As a matter of fact, fighting words from the leader of the official opposition. This is always fabulous, Johnny, when something like this happens on the national stage, or you may even argue on the international stage, just about 48 hours before we have an interview confirmed with what somebody might call a real newsmaker.
Yeah, this
and
is
the Honourable
great.
Sean Fraser would qualify Canada's Housing Minister just a couple of days ago, April 15th, in the House of Commons. The official opposition leader, Pierre Poilievre, referring to Fraser as the most incompetent immigration minister in Canadian history.
Shots fired.
And I saw that, I heard that, and I went, can we bump up his interview? Can we get him on the show sooner? We're going to get into it with Minister Fraser, how the federal government is approaching Alberta's new Provincial Priorities Act. This is, of course, Danielle Smith's plan to basically have all federal funding for basically everything go across her desk. She wants the province to, she wants funding to pass the provincial purity test. That's not the way they're putting it. She's calling it the stay out of my backyard bill. We've been talking about that bill on the show. We'll get a sense of where the federal Trudeau government stands on that. How has immigration contributed to the housing crunch? How does Budget 2024 put in front of Canadians just a couple of days ago? As you know, yesterday, kind of our more comprehensive digging into the budget with a few different expert voices from a few different perspectives. But what does the federal government say to Canadians in particular facing that affordability crisis, the very real one that may be impacting your household? And does it do enough on housing? I've heard a lot of people say, I thought this was supposed to be the housing budget. Where was the big splash? Where was the $100 billion splash? We'll put that in front of the minister. On the back half of the show today, we're going to talk to an economist out of the University of Ottawa. You know, everybody talks about Dr. Andrew Leach out of Alberta, out of the University of Alberta.
Yeah.
Leach is like, he went and he studied law, and he's an economist, and so everybody kind of goes to him. He's an energy economist, they say. So whenever you want to talk about things like the carbon tax or whatever, Leach is kind of your guy, and you'll see him doing the national news circuit. He's been on this show many times as well. I reached out to Andrew Leach. A question that kind of popped up organically. I think it was in our YouTube live chat, maybe like a week ago.
Okay.
It would have been right around, I think, when that April 1st carbon tax bump came. And someone asked a pretty simple question, but it's a pretty important one. And that was basically, how do we know if the carbon tax is actually working? Like, how do we know if it's actually effective?
There's levels to it, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. And like, is it impacting consumer behavior? Is it actually making a difference? I think a lot of people, like at just like a street level, John and Jill Q Public go, well, if I'm getting back more than I'm paying in, then what work is it actually doing? And is it actually impacting people's behavior? And are people actually making these demonstrable changes? Are we making a difference? So Andrew Leach, I reach out to him. I say, this feels like right in your wheelhouse. He goes, He goes, Nick Rivers out of Ottawa is the guy on this. And so we've been waiting to talk to him. Obviously, he's got a busy schedule, as do most people.
So
we got Rivers on the show today. Well, I've asked him off camera in our correspondence. I said, can you just like dumb it down?
Yeah.
Can you dumb it down so the average person, when they're talking to their friend on the sideline at the soccer field, at the kids' game, or like at the pub, can actually just, in layperson's language, describe or discuss whether or not the carbon tax is actually working? So all of this coming up in this episode of Real Talk, which is made possible by Business Career College. And there's a pretty simple message from our friends at Business Career College, and that is right now, if you're desiring a rewarding and high-paying career, who isn't, but you don't have a university degree, why not get started as an insurance professional with Business Career College? You know, this could be a six-figure gig for you quickly, and all you really need to do is take an approved course and then pass your licensing exam. Business Career College offers industry-leading approved courses in life insurance, property and casualty insurance. Plus, they've got expert instructors that are passionate about helping you launch your new career. They want you to succeed, and so do we. And that's why right now we're working with BCC to make sure that you save 15% off any Business Career College insurance course with the code REALTALK. That's all one word, REALTALK, when you get started today at businesscareercollege.com. The Honourable Sean Fraser is Canada's Housing Minister, formerly Canada's Immigration Minister, kind enough to join us live here just a couple of days after the federal budget drops. Nice to see your face. Thanks for making time. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, so if you were a talk show host, you know exactly where I would be chomping at the bit when Pierre Poilievre calls you the worst immigration minister in Canadian history. I go, man, I can't wait to ask this guy how that lands with him. Fair fire. It's been tough for Canada to navigate immigration over the past few years. What's your response to the leader of the official opposition?
Look, I don't value my self-worth based on the opinions of Mr. Poilievre. He's got a reputation that he lives up to routinely about lashing out about anybody who may score a point on him in politics. He's pretty sensitive after you have an exchange in the House of Commons where you're critical of his time as the Minister of Jobs who lost a bunch of jobs, or the Minister of Housing who didn't build any houses. But with respect to my time in immigration, I'm very proud of the work that we did to help address the labor shortage in provinces right across Canada. Very proud of the work that we did to make good on our commitment to Afghans who fought alongside the Canadian Armed Forces. I'm very proud of the work that we did to invent a new program to allow Ukrainians to come to Canada to escape Putin's war of aggression. There are a number of challenges, don't get me wrong, when it comes to the influx of people that we saw coming when, after a few years of the border being closed, we were able to welcome people again. There's some challenges that we have, in particular with the international student program, but we're working to address those now. So my goal is not to appease Mr. Poilievre. My goal is to do my job with a level of competence that I think Canadians would respect. And I'm proud of the record that we've established, but there's a lot of work left to do ahead.
How has immigration contributed to Canada's housing crunch? I see and hear a lot of people drawing a direct line there. What's your perception or understanding of it?
So there's a number of different factors that are contributing to the challenges we're having around housing. In certain communities, rapid population growth can be one of them, but it would not do service to the needs of the housing market in Canada to attribute the challenge exclusively to immigration. We've been dealing with a scenario where a lot of the properties that existed were bought up, not by newcomers to Canada, but by people who were benefiting from very low interest rates during the pandemic. We've now seen an increasing price of home building because the cost of materials, supplies, labor, land, and interest have all gone up. Certainly, as we welcome people to Canada to address some of the labor shortage constraints, and we saw colleges and universities ramp up the study permit applications significantly without having provincial governments crack down on the bad actors in the system who were exploiting it. There are certain pockets within Canada who have received more people than they have the capacity to absorb. But I think it's dangerous for us to blame the housing crisis exclusively on immigration, particularly when we still require newcomers to work in our healthcare system, to actually contribute their skills to home construction, to support the needs of a growing tech sector, including in Calgary. The thing that we need to do is work more closely with provincial governments and with communities to ensure that we're aligning the intake of newcomers with the absorptive capacity of those communities. There's some measures we put in place over the last couple of months that are going to help significantly, but we still have to overcome those other challenges behind the housing crisis, including the rise of cost of building, among other things.
Yeah, so enter the federal budget, obviously this week. That's where all eyes are, introduced by your colleague, Chrystia Freeland, Finance Minister, Deputy Prime Minister. Kind of the word on the street here was people thought this was supposed to be the affordability and housing budget, and I think that most folks were expecting to see a bit more of a splash. I know that there were a lot of pre-budget announcements, some of them made by the Prime Minister himself, including our home city of Edmonton, but the budget I don't think is necessarily being understood or perceived or characterized by the average person as the housing budget. How come?
Look, the reaction that I've seen from folks in the housing sector feel very differently. Certainly, we rolled out some of the measures included in the budget in the weeks leading up to the budget, but they're still funded in the budget. There's a number of things that the budget does, and it's being discussed as the most comprehensive set of reforms in generations, potentially ever, in Canadian history. Enormous new measures to help reduce the cost of building by not only removing the GST from new apartment construction, but allowing an accelerated capital cost allowance, new low-cost financing programs that will allow us to strike bilateral deals with provinces and to work directly with developers to build more quickly. A huge step into the federal land space by making more federal lands available for home building, but significant investments to help with low-income housing and new measures that make it easier to save up for a down payment and to reduce monthly mortgage costs. This is the biggest change in housing policy that we've seen certainly since the 1960s, but potentially nearly ever in Canada when it comes to housing. So we are seeking not to play at the margins, but to actually solve the housing crisis. And this plan is a major step in a new direction in that regard.
The budget, or at least the plan, endeavors to see close to 4 million homes built, 3.9 million homes by 2031. It'll be interesting to see how this happens, because you talk to industry, developers say, yeah, we need support from different levels of government, and let us do it. Let us do what we do best. Edmonton's in a bit of a sore spot here. Anytime it seems that the city tries to get into the development business, it blows up in people's faces. You got a big hurdle, well, maybe perceived or otherwise. Right now with the Provincial Priorities Act, Alberta's government says it doesn't want you. It doesn't want the feds, Ottawa, dealing directly with municipalities. And Danielle Smith, she says she's prepared to take you guys to court. What's the plan here to make sure that this all happens seamlessly and quite frankly, right now?
So I find it interesting, and the provincial governments are within their authorities to regulate the relationship that municipalities have with other levels of government. But it does add a layer of bureaucracy that could slow down the process and prevent progress. If you look at the Housing Accelerator Fund, we were able to achieve deals with cities and communities right across the province, big and small: Calgary, Edmonton, Airdrie, Sylvan Lake, Banff, Bow Island, Dutchess, a number of others, and delivered precisely Alberta's population share by working quickly, directly with cities to implement the changes that cities are in control of. Most of the programs going forward, though, actually contemplate in the first instance reaching an agreement with provincial governments. I actually have a meeting later today to discuss a potential bilateral agreement for low-cost financing across Alberta. If you look at the infrastructure funding we're putting in place, we're going to start by working directly with provinces that make it easier to build homes and cheaper to manage the infrastructure that we're going to invest in. If provinces are willing to achieve those things by making it easier to build homes, we actually want to work with provinces. If they don't wish to, we've signaled the desire to work with cities. And if Alberta wants to add a layer of bureaucracy in between those, then that's their choice. But it could potentially slow down the progress we achieve.
So are you implying, or are you saying that the Alberta government has not come to the table when invited in past? Like, is this entire relationship or lack of relationship being misrepresented by the Premier?
So the only instance where we've worked directly with the cities when it comes to housing during my tenure as the housing minister was on the Housing Accelerator Fund. After we started rolling out some of the major announcements, notably Calgary and Edmonton was in the hopper at the time, we started to hear noise from the provincial government around their desire to legislate the inability of municipalities to work directly with the municipal or federal government. We indicated at the time if they wanted to, for example, do the same thing that Quebec had done and match funding and implement reforms that would impact communities across the province, then we would be willing to entertain those kind of conversations. But we were too far down that path. It wasn't that Alberta refused to, it's that we were too deep into the mission for them to make a proposal at that point in time. I think there's great opportunities. In fact, as I signaled a moment ago, the call later today will be to discuss how we can leverage our low-cost financing tools. But Alberta will have to put support on the table as well. This is not a mission for me to transfer funding to provincial governments and claim success. It's a mission to solve the housing crisis. So if we're going to introduce federal resources, which come from Canadians, by the way, I think I owe it to Canadians to demonstrate that we're actually getting outcomes for the investments that we're making. And hopefully the conversation today will go well and we'll be able to make significant progress by working collaboratively.
Yeah, so who are you going to be talking to today? Who's going to be around that table, just so we understand?
Yeah, today's a call with Minister Nixon, who I've had a number of meetings with before. I think we've got a positive working relationship, despite the odd comment you'll see in the news about the role of the province or federal government. His team and my team remain connected regularly. We've had positive exchanges. Look, it's not ordinary for any two people to agree on every single thing all the time, but I think he wants to build more homes, and I do too. And that's a pretty healthy starting point for us to do right by the people who live in Alberta, which, by the way, I called home for about 5 years.
Oh, really? Where'd you live?
I had the Beltline in Calgary.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I worked downtown, yeah.
Yeah, nice spot. If you're just tuning in, we're talking to Sean Fraser, Minister of Housing, Infrastructure, and Communities. Your boss was in this studio on February 21st, talked to us for about an hour ahead of announcing a $175 million investment in housing through that accelerator fund. The plan is to build about 5,200 new housing units in Edmonton over the next 3 years. Is the federal government prepared to look at those deals again, to open up those deals again, to work with and through the province, or are those deals done? I have to imagine that some municipalities are maybe a little bit jittery about deals that they perceive to have already been struck.
Look, from my perspective, those deals are done. We have a contractual obligation to meet our end of the bargain, so long as our contracting partner meets their end. That's going to demand that the cities we've struck deals with actually implement the changes that they have agreed to. But my expectation is that no one is seeking to now pull money away from cities who have, in good faith, made a bargain with the federal government in exchange for the kinds of reforms that's going to make it easier to build homes. Edmonton has committed to do a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to changing the way that they allow homes to be built, to make it easier, to make it faster, and to build more affordable housing. So my full expectation is the cities that we've already signed agreements with will be bound by those agreements, as will the federal government.
In closing, I'm just curious to know the vibe around the cabinet table right now. Obviously, the stories, the polling's down. There's a bunch of momentum behind Poilievre. Will Trudeau stay on or not? Will the NDP, treat this budget like that confidence motion, pass it despite Jagmeet Singh's criticism? What's the vibe around cabinet right now when you're polling? Basically, people are saying you guys are going to lose 100 seats.
So the vibe around the cabinet table, I think, is a healthy one, because we're not focused on ourselves. We're focused on what we're going to do to help the people that we represent. The communities that I come from are going to benefit from things like student loan forgiveness for healthcare workers and teachers who choose to work in rural communities. They're going to benefit from dental care. They're going to benefit from coverage of contraceptives and diabetic medication. And they're also going to benefit from major new investments that are designed to solve the housing crisis. My sense is that you can't look week to week at the progress a particular policy achieves on your national polling. You've got to look at the progress that your policies make in the lives of the people who live in real communities across Canada over the course of a few years. We maintain confidence that if we put measures in place that are going to help working Canadians with the cost of living and create opportunities for economic growth, that we're going to be rewarded. But our focus is not on our own electoral fortunes. Our focus is on the well-being of Canadians. And I think if we maintain that focus, the rest will take care of itself. That's
the Honourable Sean Fraser. He's Canada's Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities. Thanks for making time for us ahead of this big meeting in Alberta.
Yeah, have pleasure. Take care.
You got it. See the comments in the live chat. We got some cynics. Someone says, hey, it's the guy that lost track of 1 million people, someone said. Someone else, Native Calgarian. Good to see them in the chat. Says, Jespo, Johnny, thank you for having Sean on. So there you go. Like it or not. We don't guarantee you're going to like our guests or agree with what they have to say, but different perspectives at the table. Mm-hmm. And obviously, we want to hear from the government of Alberta as well. So we're working behind the scenes. We want to get different perspectives on this Bill 18. I got an email to talk@ryanjesperson.com from Sarah Bisbee. Does the name, I'm putting you on the spot, does the name ring a bell?
Of course,
do you remember Mummy Bikes?
Yeah,
remember the e-bike family? Mm-hmm. Sarah joined us, 6 months ago or something like that, to talk about how her family had given up their minivan, and they were just riding e-bikes, and they live in the suburbs, and they have 4 kids. So
Great
basically,
story.
She didn't say it this way, but she was like, don't try to give me excuses why you can't live a car-free life, because we're doing it with 4 kids in the suburbs. Well, she wrote in an email, and she says, our last interaction may have been cargo bikes, but this email, she says, I'm putting my lawyer hat on, and she wants to talk about Bill 18 and funding clinical trials. So I thought we could we got to have good depths of understanding on this. Mm-hmm. We got a note, a private one from a pretty prominent mayor in the province yesterday that wrote in to say, when is your show? Of course, yesterday's episode, that would have been our April 17th episode of the show. Our episode was all about digging into the budget. We've also been talking about post-secondary, how this Bill 18, this Provincial Priorities Act, this Get Out of My Backyard, Stay Out of My Backyard Act for the province, how this new initiative out of Alberta could impact post-secondaries on the research front, on the reputation front, on the whatever, on a million fronts, right? So we dedicate kind of an entire episode to that. We get 3 different perspectives-ish. One, a researcher and a professor. One, a PhD student. And one, the former social media manager of the U of A, Andy Grabia, who was hilarious. I feel like, people say that someone walks in and they pulled the pin on the grenade. I feel like Andy just rolls around with all the pins pulled out anyway.
He came in with a rocket launcher.
Talking about how the premier's got the memory of a goldfish, and this had just went off. But making some compelling points. And we got some feedback on Andy's appearance on the show. People are saying, just bring him back on a roundtable about whatever. So we get a note from a mayor yesterday that says, well, when's your special episode on Bill 18 and communities, on Bill 18 and municipalities? And I said to her, well, we're going to work with our friends at Alberta Municipalities, make sure that we have that perspective represented, because that's an entirely different ball of wax, an entirely different perspective, right? That's kind of the thing about this bill, is that it could impact a million different things. And this mayor, she says to us, well, whenever you're putting that panel together, she says, I want to be on it. She says, I am hopping mad.
All right.
I thought, okay, hopping mad mayors can make for good talk shows.
We love the drama.
Well, hey, we want to cut through the drama and get to the real purpose of the conversation. What's the real meat? Well, this feels like I'm teeing up a Friesen Brothers ad, doesn't it? What's the real meat of the conversation? We'll get to Sarah's email, lawyers and funding of clinical trials, in just a second, but our friends at Friesen Brothers do want you to know, Johnny and I didn't even work on that segue. We didn't even practice it. Don't forget, coming up on May 1st, Friesen Brothers, that's your next chance to save 15% off your groceries, $75 purchases or more total. It's a big deal, 15% off. That's why we have Wednesday, May 1st circled on our calendar. 17 different locations. If you live in Alberta, you'll find a Friesen Brothers. And don't forget to visit their brand new location. That's Friesen Brothers Glenora, fabulously curated, a butcher shop that'll blow your mind. Make sure you stick around for a fresh sourdough sandwich. Friesen Brothers is Alberta grown and Alberta owned. Our friends at Kubi Renewable Energy are putting out the call for electricians. If you got your ticket, if you're an apprentice, if you're great at sales, if you're great at HR, if you're a premium office manager, Kubi would love to talk to you. You can check out the careers link at kubienergy.ca as they're growing clean energy in Canada. It's the time of year where folks that have invested in solar solutions, could be their residence, their business, maybe it's a farm, maybe it's a big old warehouse, whatever it is, this is the time of year. Look at that fire hall, Canada's first net zero fire hall we're showing you on YouTube. Kubi installed that. That's one of the cleanest installations I've ever seen of anything. Beautiful stuff from Kubi Renewable Energy. We talk a lot about emissions. A lot of the budget, we're talking about emissions. We're about to talk about the carbon tax. Pathways Alliance is the 6th largest oil sands companies working together with governments, provincial and federal governments, to make sure that Alberta can deliver the clean energy that the global markets are calling for. A proposed carbon capture and storage network for Canada's oil sands as energy demands change. Pathways Alliance is planning to build a large-scale carbon capture and storage network that should reduce emissions from operations, protect existing jobs, and create new ones. Responsibly produced energy is what the world is demanding, and Pathways Alliance believes it's what Alberta can provide. You can learn more by checking out pathwaysalliance.ca. We'll get to economist Nick Rivers of the University of Ottawa in just a quick second. This is kind of like, a layperson's, as Ralph Klein used to say, Martha and Henry. Martha and Henry would want to know, is the carbon tax actually working? Is the carbon tax actually effective? So we'll ask Nick Rivers that in just a quick second. Emails to talk@ryanjesperson.com. We always appreciate your feedback. And we got this one from Sarah Bisbee, who joined us on the show before to talk about how her family's doing their part to go car-free. She's a lawyer as well. That's her day job, so to speak, working in health law. She says, specifically, Real Talkers, I work in clinical trials, and a large portion of my clients receive federal funding for their research. So she thought she'd chime in on Bill 18, the big story. I mean, if the budget wasn't out this week, it seems like this is all people would be talking about in Canadian politics. She says this funding enables clinical trials in every medical area you could possibly think of: cancer, ALS, dementia, maternal care, cardiology, neurology, asthma, diabetes, pediatrics, you get it. She says these are trials that industry, like big pharma, like Pfizer and Bayer, they don't want to fund, either because there's no money in it, but potential value in patient care, like maybe new uses for old drugs, new processes that replace or supplement standard of care, or because it might take away from industry drugs, like novel treatments that replace drugs that pharma currently has under patent. In other words, there's not like a business argument for it. She says you had guests on the show on April 16th that mentioned, in the context of post-secondaries, that we may see an exodus of talented researchers due to Bill 18. Sarah says in the medical realm, we're already seeing it as doctors who work in clinical settings but also have research appointments to the universities take off for greener pastures. Add the pressure from Bill 18, and it may tip the scales for many remaining researchers. Ryan interjecting here, that is what you would refer to as a brain drain. Back to Sarah. She says, I'll remind people that we have and Johnny, check this screen out. I'll show, she says, a Nobel Prize in Medicine winner, Dr. Michael Houghton, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, at the University of Alberta, who's utilizing federal funding in his work. She says, and I assume that he would probably, as a Nobel Prize winner in medicine, be welcome at any university worldwide. And she says you could probably say that for most of our researchers. Alberta is about to open the new cancer center in Calgary. She says one goal of that new center is to increase the amount of research. And that can only happen if we retain existing researchers and recruit new ones to come to Alberta at the same time. She says, like Dr. Michael Chu at the Cross Cancer Center in Edmonton is an example. She says, for any real talkers that may say that this doesn't matter, that the UCP is not going to stop medical research, she says, are you so sure? Medical research shouldn't be political. I agree, but we've seen it politicized lately. For example, some of the research being conducted in Alberta under this funding includes vaccine research. Some of it is COVID research. Some of it is vaccines for strep throat. She says, other diseases as well. Alberta, like the other provinces, conducted significant amounts of COVID research during the pandemic, and that continues today. There are also clinical trials on the effect of hormone therapy in trans and cis individuals. You can check out studies.bethecure.ca if you want to learn more about those. We can link to that in the show notes. She says, can we trust that this type of research would be acceptable under Bill 18? Can we? She says, take a look at the website that I'm including. And Sarah, we appreciate that. She says, bethecure.ca. All of the trials that are listed there have federal funding. And she says there are hundreds of studies listed. Now, one organization involved in clinical trials in Alberta has almost 2,000 ongoing studies. They've completed more than 10,000 more. That is only one of many organizations involved in clinical research in the province. She says you can all check it out online. Now, Sarah says, I'm not sure what danger the Premier sees that would justify jeopardizing the research I'm telling you about, but there is already concern in the research community over this, and I worry that we're going to lose talented people as a result of that uncertainty. And she says, by the way, I did listen to the April 16th episode of Real Talk on my cargo bike riding home.
There you go.
Great take from Sarah. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it was kind of disheartening to hear that her bikes were vandalized after the show. Hopefully not a result of the show, but just a pretty sad ending to what I thought was an amazing show. She also hit me up in a personal email because I was asking her, how do I ride my bike from the south side, Yager Ridge, Chappelle area? I'm scared to get on Gateway. No way to get to work. She talked
to her. Didn't you kind of feel like there wasn't a route for where you're living to how you get downtown? And then she reached out proactively and kind of mapped it out for you.
10 minutes later, she had a whole adjusted map for me to get to work, and I'm going to try it this summer.
I was going to say, how many times have you ridden your bike since she sent you that adjusted?
It's sitting in the garage with flat tires.
There's still snow and ice. There's still snow and ice.
Yesterday was just... if you're living in Edmonton right now, it is like you turn on the heat on the way to work, you turn on the AC on the way home. There's ice on the way to work, and it's totally clear and sunny on the way home. It's
Seasons
crazy
are changing,
weather
baby.
Tornado we're living in right
Seasons are changing. We welcome your comments to talk at ryanjesperson.com. Anything that you hear on the show, I see a lot of people appreciate that email in the chat. Seventh Pilot chiming in says the carbon tax is great. It keeps inflation up and it keeps interest rates up. And for some of those that make money, savings off high interest, he says this could be a real plus. I don't know if maybe that's tongue in cheek a little bit. Why don't we find out if the carbon tax is actually working? Is Nick ready to rock with us right now? I'm looking forward to this conversation. Our next guest comes highly recommended. He's an associate professor of environmental economics at the University of Alberta. That's where he studies climate change and air pollution. It's a pleasure to welcome Nick Rivers to the show. Thanks for making time for us, Nick. Are you on campus right now? Is that where we find you?
Yeah, but you got the wrong campus. I'm at University of Ottawa in Ontario, not at Alberta.
Oh, what did I say? Did I say Alberta? Oh, sorry. Yeah, I've said Ottawa 100 times this morning. Sorry. Yeah, we definitely know you're in Ottawa, and that is because because I was talking to, I think, a mutual friend of ours, Dr. Andrew Leach, and he's been a great friend of this show. But I really respect when somebody says, listen, if you want the best voice on this, or if you want the best guest on this, you got to go elsewhere. And Dr. Leach, none other than him, said that you understand probably our number one question, our lead question, better than anybody else, and that is the carbon tax actually effective? Before we get into that, can you tell us a bit about your work so we understand the lens through which you'll be seeing this?
Sure. Yeah, I do work on trying to understand the kind of social and economic effects of environmental policies, especially. So when a new environmental policy is brought in, I try to understand how it might affect the distribution of income or overall income levels, or whether the environmental policy is effective at targeting emissions. I also study impacts of climate change or air pollution on similar kinds of social and economic outcomes. So I might try to understand, if air pollution levels are really high, how does that impact how we carry on our lives? How does it impact how productive we are at work, or how effectively we can make decisions, or how we perform on tests, that kind of thing?
It's fascinating. I was talking to a buddy yesterday. This has nothing to do with the carbon tax, although maybe it does. And he's a restaurateur, and he's getting set to invest in a pretty ambitious outdoor scape for this summer. They're really investing in their patio, and it's going to look amazing. And I said, well, hopefully Mother Nature will give you just a fabulous summer where you can capitalize and pay for this in one summer and really can drive your revenue. And the guy could use a bit of a break. And he goes, you know what? He says, I'm most worried about the wildfires. He said, I'm most worried about smoke. And I don't know why that kind of hadn't been on my radar. I was thinking more rain, but he goes, no, it was smoke that killed them last summer.
Yeah, well, we have a lot of friends that vacation out west here, and smoke is the big concern, right? People are changing vacation plans with respect to smoke. We had the big where I live in Ottawa, had the big pulse of wildfire smoke from Quebec last summer. And we couldn't go outside for a week. It was, you couldn't even see across the street. So it really impacts both, the kind of things we do, but also our health. So yeah, I think this is the big thing to watch out for going forward.
Yeah. So I guess you'll probably tell me that my question is too general, but why don't we get started? Is the carbon tax actually effective? Is it actually working? What do we know?
Right. Good question. So I'll just start by saying, we collect a lot of data on emissions, right? So you can go and look at Statistics Canada or Environment Canada, and you can see the emissions levels at particular facilities, like how many greenhouse gases they're producing. You can look and see what they are going back over time at the level of a province or a country. We can look at fuel consumption data. So we have we're swimming in data, but we can't look at that data and figure out directly from the data if the carbon tax is working. And that sounds a bit counterintuitive, but what we're trying to do when we're asking the question, is the carbon tax working? What we'd like to do is compare the emissions that you're showing in that figure, what our greenhouse gas emissions are at, maybe it's at the facility level or a household level or the province or country level, with what they would have been if we didn't have a carbon price. And so we're trying to compare the actual emissions with some imaginary counterfactual emissions for what they would have looked like if there was no carbon price in place, and hopefully you can see that that's not something we could just look at the data and see, because we don't have another Canada where there wasn't a carbon tax applied to compare to.
Okay, so are you saying, and I really want to keep, I will be in charge of dumbing this down because I'm very good at that. So you could say, well, listen, industry is growing, the population is growing, there's all these trends that are contributing to the fact that, the numbers here at Canada.ca show that between 1990 and 2021, over that 30-year period, Canada's greenhouse gas emissions increased by 14%. But the premise is they may have increased by 25% without a carbon tax?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is exactly the same. This is not unique to the carbon price. Let's just say that. Any intervention we make, we can't just look at the data and see if it's effective. Let me give you other examples. We can't tell if universal health care makes us healthier by looking at health data. We can't tell if spending too little or too much on national defense makes us safer. We can't tell if having a free trade agreement with the US makes us trade more. It's the same in any case. We can look and see what our trade data is now, or our mortality data is now, but we can't see what it would have been if we didn't have the free trade agreement, or if we didn't have expenditures on national defense or a single payer healthcare system. For that, we have to like imagine what the counterfactual would have been without those interventions. So the carbon price is no different than any other big intervention in that we can't just look at the data directly and see the impact of the carbon tax.
We've got an interesting question here from Garth, and I kind of appreciate how he phrases it. He says, "I just want to know how come 8 out of 10 Canadians," and this is referencing the number that the Prime Minister puts in front of people, including on this show. He says, "I just want to know how come 8 out of 10 Canadians are better off from the carbon tax, but 8 out of 10 Canadians seem to want it gone." He says there seems to be some confusion.
Okay,
I think
we're
that's
going in a different
well,
direction on this question.
But I kind of like that.
I want to get back to the other one.
Okay,
I'm not finished with the other one.
You take this wherever you want to go. But
I don't want to ignore Garth, but let's just put that on the shelf for 1 second.
Garth, we'll get back to your question.
My answer for the first part, which is, we can't just look at the data directly and see what the impact of the carbon tax has been, just like any other big intervention. So we've got to use like some proxies. We've got to look at the data in different ways. And I'd say there's two big ways that people have gone about looking at the data to try to figure out if the carbon tax has been effective. One of them is that they try to make, we can't see this unobservable counterfactual, what Canada would have looked like without a carbon tax, but we can try to look at situations where there is this kind of counterfactual available. And so let me give you an example. Imagine we've got a firm that happens to be regulated by a carbon tax, and we can find another firm that produces the same product, serves the same market, but for whatever reason doesn't happen to be targeted by a carbon tax. And that gives us a really nice kind of example or a situation where we could try to tease out what the impact of the carbon tax is by looking at these two firms. And if we can do that, for lots and lots of firms, then we can get a sense of what the carbon tax might have done in terms of those firm emissions. And that's certainly something that researchers have done. They've done lots of studies of firms that look very similar, except that one's been targeted by a carbon tax and the other hasn't. And in those studies, it looks like carbon prices have been quite effective in driving down emissions. That even at relatively low levels of carbon pricing, let's say $50 a ton and less, we're seeing the firms that get targeted by carbon prices with emissions of somewhere between 10 and 15 or even 30% lower than firms that don't get targeted by carbon taxes.
Is there a jurisdiction somewhere in the world, I'm kind of putting you on the spot, that does not implement or has not implemented carbon pricing or a carbon tax per se, but in your estimation would still be doing or taking a responsible approach to addressing climate change? Like, I guess I'm just asking you, like, is there alternative policy you see out there that is effective?
Yeah, we don't have to do a carbon tax. There's other ways we can get at reducing emissions. They have other benefits and other costs. So as an example, the US, the Senate has basically come out and said a number of times, we're not ready to pass it. We don't want to pass a carbon price. And so the US, with this government, wants to reduce emissions. And the way they've done it is with government basically paying for it. So the government is going to tax you in other ways and subsidize emission reductions. This is called the Inflation Reduction Act in the US. In most other jurisdictions that are trying hard to reduce emissions, we do see a carbon price being used. And the reason is that it's seen as one of the most effective and one of the most decentralized ways of reducing emissions. It means it takes the kind of micromanagement out of government's hands and lets individuals like you and me or businesses figure out the best way to respond to the price and reduce emissions for their own facility.
Can you see, like, have you seen any meaningful, I don't know, I can't ask the question with a straight face, but have you seen meaningful alternative policy proposals from the official opposition? Anything that intrigues you or grabs your attention? I'm not trying to make the question political, but I mean, it's just an obvious question. If Pierre Poilievre is indeed going to axe the tax, most Canadians, including conservative voters, I would imagine will say, well, what's your plan? What's your alternative approach? Let's get into it.
Yeah, so let's start by saying I think there can be other alternative approaches, and they would especially be focused on regulation. Poilievre has not articulated any other approach, so he has not said what he'd replace the carbon tax with if he axed it, and so I would say we could avoid right now thinking that about past the next election, if this tax goes, we don't, my current understanding is it'll be replaced by nothing. But I mean, maybe we'll see something being proposed over the course of the next 18 months. But right now, there has been nothing proposed.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like most Canadians expect to see something. I guess I don't have a lot of time for conversations around climate change isn't real, or Canada's emissions are so negligible that Canada shouldn't have to do anything. Yeah. I don't buy into that, but I'm also I want to remain open-minded to understand that with any taxation or with any government approach, there can be alternatives. There can be better ideas.
So the big alternatives in this case would be a U.S. focused approach, a U.S. type approach, which is, we're not going to have a carbon tax. We're going to go pretty light on regulations. And instead, the government is just going to pay for emission reductions. And that sounds good, except, of course, government has to raise the money from somewhere, right? So it's taxes the whole way down, right? So they have to obviously raise taxes to pay for the whatever the government expenditures are. So in the U.S., government is paying for things like heat pumps. They have big subsidies for electric vehicles. They're paying big credits for renewable energy and carbon capture and storage and hydrogen and that kind of thing. The program is in the U.S. writ large is less ambitious than Canada's emission reduction policy, but it's a subsidy focused approach. The other alternative that could be taken to replace the carbon tax with and still try to achieve big emission reductions would be a regulation focused approach, where government wouldn't say, we're gonna increase the prices on fossil fuels and you guys can respond however you like. It would be government saying, we're gonna tell you what kinds of technologies you can buy, or how you can, heat your home, or how businesses can source their energy or produce their output, and they have to respond by complying with the regulation. So I would say that's a more heavy-handed approach to reducing emissions.
Kyle, in our live chat on YouTube, if you're just tuning in, we're talking to Nick Rivers, an economist out of the University of Ottawa. He wonders if you could kind of maybe comment or split up the industrial carbon tax and the consumer carbon tax. He says, which is more or less impactful, and what do you believe would help Canada more on the trade front? It's interesting when you talk about carbon tax, like even in this budget released just a couple of days ago, 5 years after consumers or, Canadians started receiving these carbon tax rebates, now small businesses will start to receive the rebates. And we go, okay, that's a different kind of a conversation. The industrial carbon tax, a completely different conversation than the consumer carbon tax. As far as I can tell, the track records of conservative governments, provincially and federally, have supported have introduced industrial carbon taxes in past, but for some reason, politically or otherwise, the consumer carbon tax doesn't play the same at all. I'm curious to know how you'll approach this.
I think you're right. So the industrial, the big polluter carbon price is, I think, less political than the consumer one, or certainly has attracted less political controversy so far. And as you say, there have been more right-leaning governments in the country that have supported it and even introduced these kinds of policies. In terms of their impact, the amount of emissions produced by big industrial emitters that are subject to these kind of carbon prices is bigger than the amount of emissions produced by people like you and I and small business. And so the impact of the industrial carbon price on our national emissions is much bigger than the impact of the consumer carbon price. There's a recent analysis done by the Canadian Climate Institute, which suggests that the industrial carbon price has probably a 2 to 3 times larger impact on our total emissions compared to the consumer carbon price. So certainly a bigger deal in terms of hitting our climate targets.
Do you think, I mean, to build off Kyle's question on the economic implications of this, if you were to relax or decrease or cut like an industrial or big polluter carbon tax, do you think it draws business? Like a lot of jurisdictions that brag or boast or attract investment, attract corporate headquarters because of their low tax regime. Would that work in this instance with big industry in Canada? Or do you think it might make international investors a bit skittish, that Canada's not taking emissions seriously, that this is not what the world is looking for? How can you see that might play?
Yeah. Okay. I think that's a couple of good questions. First of all, I do think there is like a green competition now, so that there's, countries are trying to compete for green businesses. And I think that this the kinds of industrial carbon pricing we have right now across the country can be impactful in bringing business to a jurisdiction. Let me explain why. That sounds weird because it's a carbon tax. I think it would add more regulatory costs to a business. But I think that it's the opposite for new businesses. Most of these carbon pricing systems say, if you get below a certain performance benchmark, if you get your emissions intensity, the amount of emissions you produce per unit of output, below a performance benchmark, we will pay you. The government will pay you in carbon credits. If you're worse than the emissions benchmark, if you're producing more than the emissions benchmark, you'll have to pay the government. And so new facilities are likely to be these more emissions intensive facilities and actually can benefit from moving into a jurisdiction with this kind of system. They can generate carbon credits because they tend to be these clean facilities and can end up being more competitive as a result of this kind of tax system.
So let's get back to Garth's question here, because you've got 6 out of the Canadian premiers, 6 of them have requested meetings with the Prime Minister. Anecdotally, it's been interesting. You know, we've been the first talk show to speak to all of the candidates for the leadership of the Alberta NDP, and about half of them, off the top of my head, have mused about Alberta walking away from a consumer carbon tax, assuming a Poilievre government at the federal level. You can tell that the tide is turning, and maybe it was the Atlantic Canada heating pump thing, but whatever it is, I think it's a pretty safe statement to suggest that the Prime Minister lost public confidence.
Absolutely.
Right, in this carbon tax. And so you got to wonder, like, does he go to the wall with this into the next election? Does he stick with it? Garth's question, if 8 out of 10 Canadians are benefiting from it, receiving more in rebates than they're paying into it, and then, Garth will, sort of introduce his own statistic here, but anecdotally, he feels like, why do 8 out of 10 Canadians want it gone? Well, let's dig into that. That's more of a psychological or a sociological.
I don't have an answer for you.
It's more of a sociological question.
Yeah, the big, when you look at polling for the support for the carbon price, which is what I think the only thing I can have to go on here, I think there's a lack of understanding of what's going on. So I think most people don't believe that they're getting a fiscal benefit from this policy. So the government calculates this, and independent groups have also calculated this and suggested the same thing as government, that about 8 out of 10 Canadians in provinces where this applies will receive more in carbon tax rebates than they pay in carbon taxes. But that doesn't mean that people believe that of themselves. The other thing that I would say undermines support for the carbon price is that people, and that's what this whole premise of this segment is, people don't see it working. So people can't say, I'm paying this carbon tax and I'm happy to pay it if I know it's driving emissions down. But I think people aren't able to connect those dots. People can't see that this is really having a big impact on emissions. And that's for the reason that I mentioned above. We can't just look at the data and see that this is having an impact on emissions. We have to compare it to a counterfactual, and that requires, people with PhDs are spending years of their lives trying to do this kind of calculation. And it's not something that it's easy to just look at and realize that this is having an impact on emissions. So
okay,
the two big things that are, yeah.
So, sorry, I stepped on your toes there, but so what do you say to your buddy? You have the same buddy that I do, and we're all out at the pub together, and he's the one guy, and he means well, and he's a good dude, and he's not an idiot, and he's not a troll, and he's not trying. But he really just he looks you in the eye, and he says, "But look what China's doing. Look what India's doing right now." He says, "You got to be kidding me. This just it doesn't. It's insignificant what we're doing. It's almost immeasurable." What do you say to that buddy of yours?
This is the crux of the climate problem. What each one of us does is insignificant to the climate. And when you add it all up, we're blowing through our carbon budgets, and we're going to have a world that is inhospitable. And so, this is what we sometimes call the common property resource problem, that each of us doesn't think about the whole when we make our decisions. And you can take that to the country level as well. And I think it's the real issue with the climate problem. And to me, the way that we address it, if we all take that position, if we all take the position that every other country's is kind of emitting as usual, and we don't want to be the sucker that reduces emissions while no one else does, that is effectively saying we have decided not to solve the climate problem. I think the only way this problem gets solved is if we are willing to trust each other, are willing to, move first and reduce emissions, and then, look around the world and see others taking similar sort of action. It's not going to get solved if we all say, screw those other guys, I'm going to emit.
Nick, have you taken a look? I've got a question here from Michael, and I realize we're kind of like going all over the map in the questions that we're asking you, and I appreciate your willingness to take these questions. We're talking to economist out of the University of Alberta, Nick Rivers. Michael says, is there any way that Nick could do an analysis on food prices and how the carbon tax is affecting them? Michael says there's so much disinformation online. I just did a quick Google. I noticed that at Policy Options, policyoptions.irpp.org, you can find an interesting piece on how they say carbon pricing. This is by Trevor Toome, a good friend of this show, and Jennifer Winter. Carbon pricing not to blame for Canada's affordability challenges. People can read that on their own time. But Nick, how would you take that question?
Yeah, this has been done. This kind of analysis has been done a number of times, both in Canada and internationally. And there's really no evidence that carbon pricing has a significant impact on food prices. The overall carbon content of a carrot or a bowl of rice or whatever it is low. And relative to the price of the full price of that bowl of rice, even a high carbon price has a pretty minimal percentage impact. And so when you look at these studies, and the PBO studied this, the Parliamentary Budget Officer studied this recently as well, saying that the carbon price has a negligible impact on food inflation. What will have a big impact on food price inflation, and it already is having a big impact on food price inflation, is climate change itself. We see droughts, we see extreme heat destroying crops, and those significant impacts on food production do percolate through food prices, and we can see those pop up in inflation numbers. So it's much more, the impact of climate change on food prices is much more significant than the impact of carbon prices on food prices. Orders of magnitude different.
Our live chat just let me know that I said U of A again.
It's like I missed it that time.
I owe you at least a couple of pints, Nick.
Let's font him here.
Next time you come to Edmonton, we're talking to Nick Rivers out of the University of Ottawa, our nation's freaking capital. The good news is we have a YouTube super chat going, which is where like the real hardcore supporters of the show can throw us a few bucks for our beer fridge. And Garth, after you took his question, tossed $10 in there. So you got a couple beers coming on us, Nick, next time you're in Edmonton visiting. We appreciate that. In closing, I'm just curious for your take on where this goes. Obviously there's, I don't know that this next election will be a referendum, as Jason Kenney put it in 2019 in Alberta, a referendum on the carbon tax, but it'll certainly be a big part of it. The narrative from the Conservatives, which I think has been quite effective right now, is that the tax and spend Trudeau Liberals have sort of lost touch of the real challenges that everyday Canadians are facing, and this is a big part of it. On the flip side, any meaningful, reputable conversation has to note that Canadians are seeing the impacts of climate change on a regular basis. And here's why I indicated just a tiny little bit of, I made the tongue-in-cheek comment about Garth's comment. 8 out of 10 may benefit, so says the PM. But 8 out of 10 want it gone. I'm not convinced that 8 out of 10 Canadians want it gone. I think that the majority of Canadians want to see provincial and most especially the federal government do something meaningful to address climate change, right? Would you agree? So I don't think that 8 out of 10 Canadians want the government to do absolutely nothing.
No. Yeah, I should have picked up on that earlier. You're totally right. When you look at the polling for this carbon price, it has hovered around 50%, 40 to 50% support for it since its introduction, even going all the way back to this being introduced in British Columbia in 2008. And so there is relative, not a majority support, but a relatively large amount of support for this kind of policy. And certainly there is a majority support for Canada hitting its climate targets and for Canada addressing climate change. So I see this as being if there is a change in government, I think it's entirely possible that this policy, the consumer carbon price, is gone. I think there will be a real push for a replacement from people. I think it's going to be difficult for the government, for a future government, to take away this policy and not replace it with something that is equally ambitious. And I think we're going to find out that this is a not so undesirable policy when we look for alternatives, that kind of regulation kind of approach where we say, okay, everyone has to have a heat pump, for example, which might deliver same kind of emission reductions as this, is going to be unpopular and difficult to implement. It's going to have significant kind of financial impacts on people the same way as this does. And so there's not a no cost or super easy alternative to this.
Yeah, I'm with you. You know, the idea that the consumer can choose the amount of carbon tax they pay based on the fact that, like, you don't need to drive your car, you don't need to do whatever. There's obviously been a ton of, was it the 2019 federal election? I'm trying to remember. Rachel Notley got, I think it was, it must have been the most recent one. Anyway, I think it was Danielle Smith going back and forth on Rachel Notley because Notley had, you know, someone was saying, like, are you going to ride your bus in? No, people can ride their bike or ride the bus from rural areas. And people, you know, you've seen the popular refrain, right? It's like, Albertans don't pick and choose whether or not they're going to heat their homes in -35. We can't pick or choose if we're going to drive in from our, you know, our farm into the city to whatever. And people will take issue with that, saying, I have no choice. The tax is prescribed.
I think increasingly we do have choices, right? Increasingly, we're starting to see some of these green technologies deliver services that are equivalent to fossil technologies at similar costs. So heat pumps as an example, or electric vehicles another example. There's still a cost premium to pay, which is why we can't just leave it to individuals, right? If we take away all the policies, there's going to be few people that make this transition because there is an upfront cost to pay to decarbonize across home heating and driving, which is why people need an incentive. And it's got to be either a regulation-focused incentive or a subsidy or a carbon price. My view is the carbon price gives people lots of flexibility to respond in ways that suit their own situation. And it can still be a powerful incentive at driving society at large to these kind of greener alternatives.
Nick, we asked, you agreed, you delivered. Thank you for taking our questions. We've been talking
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, Nick Rivers. I'm not going to fuck up this one, I promise. Out of the University of Ottawa, an associate professor of environmental economics. Thanks for doing this. We look forward to talking again.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you got it, man. I love conversations like that with smart people that are good at articulating what they know. And I appreciate the engagement in the live chat. Little zinger from Garth, which is Garth's been just a great friend of this show. He says, when you buy Nick those beers, he says, let him enjoy them warm. He doesn't deserve the carbon it would take to cool those beers. A little cheekiness.
I was just
going to
say, next time I order a beer and I'm with Nick, I'll be like, is this beer carbon neutral?
Is this carbon? You know, there's a lot of businesses that
was
are doing
compounded
they want to get carbon neutral
interest involved in shipping this beer.
Who was the
my table?
We won't say the specific name of the product because I don't remember which one it is, and also because they're not paying us. But there's a paper towel company I saw. There was a commercial the other day.
Really?
Advertising works, everybody. And there was a commercial the other day, and they were like, did you know? They were like, you may know that our paper towel can pick up spills and messes, but did you know that our paper towel is carbon neutral?
Wow.
And it kind of caught my attention. I went, I wonder how many more.
I think I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah, they're not the first ones to say it. Businesses have been saying it, and some businesses do it a little bit more quietly and hold it as a corporate value, and a lot of other businesses kind of amplify it. You know, a carbon-free or a carbon-neutral beer would be something that they'd want to promote.
Carbon-free paper towel, that seems...
Carbon neutral. So it just means basically that for all the work that they're doing...
They even it out.
They plant a bunch of trees.
I get it.
So that's basically, you know, what they're talking about. But I love this from Mike. Mike, I was talking about this with my 8-year-old earlier this week. Mike says, from this math teacher tuning in, shout out to all the teachers in our audience, please remind Ryan that this math teacher wants Jespo to simplify his ratios. 8 out of 10 is 4 out of 5. You're right. And I was talking about that the other day. You know, you don't want to hear about 15 out of 30. You want to hear about 1 out of 2. So I appreciate that. Holding my feet to the fire. Kenzie says, as far as I'm concerned, Kenzie, and I'm paraphrasing because I lost your comment, but she basically said everybody I know wants to get rid of the carbon tax. She says, so Kenzie says, like, so 8 out of 10 sounds 4 out of 5 sounds about right to me. I think it also matters probably. And this is not a slight. I'm just saying as a fact, probably matters who your friends are, maybe what you do for work, maybe where you live, maybe your income bracket. I don't know. Like there's probably for people that are like scraping by and these are the people that like every frickin' dollar matters. Every dollar counts. This is probably more on your radar than, who was it? I think it was someone like Curtis or someone in the chat earlier basically said that the carbon tax is a way for rich people to feel better about their carbon footprint, but it's more of a strain on the lower income people. Pardon me, it was Craig CC. Craig says the carbon tax doesn't solve anything. It makes richer people feel better about paying for their unchanged carbon footprint, and it hurts people who are forced to pay it to live life out of necessity. So
that's a
that's
fair point.
And hey, man, that's a valid perspective.
But if you're going to have that opinion that we got to get rid of the carbon tax, then we need to up other things. And you saw the graphs: oil and gas, transportation, the two top ones that are emitting carbon that need to be taxed more. And here in Alberta, taxing more on oil and gas is not a big, you don't get a lot of people waving flags on that. And then when we talk about, like we had shows, taking your bike more, maybe getting an EV or a hybrid, Alberta is not singing that tune yet either.
But there are a lot of people that are, and that's
a lot more EVs in Alberta right now, but you've also got, people not so stoked on it.
Sure, 100%. And also, the politics of all of this, we can't forget about that. Like, that's worth talking about. That is a thing, the politics of all of this. Just some interesting numbers here. You can find all of these readily available. These are StatsCan numbers, federal government numbers. Canada.ca is our source. In 2021, Canada responsible for, as you can see here, about 670 megatons of emissions. And then if you look at per industry, greenhouse gas emissions per economic sector, oil and gas it's at the top. That's not going to surprise anybody. Out of the total of 670 megatons, oil and gas responsible for about 190. Transport responsible for about 150 megatons. Buildings for 87. You don't think of all the big towers, all the big skyscrapers.
Well, you see the smoke coming out
right?
of them, right?
I mean, think about that. Heavy industry, then agriculture, electricity obviously is big. Light manufacturing, forestry, waste, and coal production responsible for 2.5.
When you look at oil and gas there, it's about a fifth more than the second place transportation. And transportation and oil together are both about double the third place. So they're the majority of what we're talking about here. So
and I don't know that anybody, even people working in oil and gas, are going to deny that.
No,
everybody knows that they're responsible for emissions. We're talking about Pathways Alliance on the show. We talk about carbon capture. Interesting conversation about hydrogen. Boy, has that hydrogen roundtable for a couple of weeks ago really
people were really interested
on.
in that,
Some folks are really bullish on it. Some people think it's a terrible idea. And we've appreciated your feedback on all of that. We just want to make sure that those conversations continue to happen here on the show. Kind of a remarkable moment on an Alberta-based political podcast this week. As a matter of fact, the podcast just out this morning. It's an unexpected development. I never thought I would see it. And we want to tell you about it in just a quick second. That's coming up. I don't know if anybody's going to believe it. I barely believed it myself.
It's a rare moment.
But it's a rare moment. But before we get there, I do want to remind you, if you are absolutely 100% committed to keeping your promise to yourself this year, and that is that you're going to get organized, it takes 5 minutes, less than that, to go to californiaclosets.ca today and check out the work that they do in custom closets and storage solutions for the entire home. And it all starts with a free design consultation. You don't go in there and pay for an hour's worth of their design team's time. You walk into a California Closets location, or they can chat with you over Zoom. But I love going into the store. You can see some of their handiwork, some of the craftsmanship, some of this design in place. These Murphy beds blow my mind. These bespoke laundry room setups, beautiful home offices. They did an entertainment center for us in our family's great room, so to speak. We call it our family room, where we spend a lot of our time together. Absolutely stunning. I mean, we just had stuff piled up everywhere before we invested in California Closets. Encourage you to do the same. Nobody does it better than California Closets. If instead of indoors, you're looking to invest in your outdoors at home this year, Eden Landscaping is your best bet to bring your outdoor space to life. Mike and his team, this family-owned business, committed to ensure that your vision is totally realized. They've been doing this for more than 20 years, and they're very much especially proud of their return business. Some folks have had them do 2, 3, even 4 of their houses over the years, and the referrals as well. You can learn more about their philosophy at Eden Landscaping how they're great listeners and why that matters to the overall process by visiting them online at landscapeedmonton.ca. And as we talk about the impact of climate change in Canada, wildfires, floods, and the like, I feel like every time I talk about it, I just start to get this anxiety around this time of year. The team at Complete Care Restoration wants to remind you that for more than a quarter century, they're certified professionals, and that's a big deal. Certified professionals have been restoring properties and rebuilding peace of mind. If your business or your home is impacted by natural disaster, or maybe your contractors or even you, when you opened up a wall, found black mold, you didn't expect to find asbestos, but there it is. Don't mess around with this on your own. Make sure that you go with the professional property restoration services ready to respond 24/7 at completecarerestoration.ca.
Don't delay. Call today.
Call today. We'll sell you the whole seat, but you'll only need the edge.
Got a nice email from their founder there.
Did you?
Yeah.
From Complete Care Restoration?
Yeah.
I don't know if he wants to be front and center in the spotlight. Should we say his
No,
Kelly?
Kelly.
Kelly
Great guy.
is one of the guys that is a real talker that is just like one of the most unbelievable supporters of this independent entity that is Real Talk that you'd ever believe, and he shows up. He's always just a huge ambassador at our Real Talk Golf Classic.
He's amazing.
Complete Care Restoration is sponsored like our putting contests and stuff, and they contribute to our premium door prizes, and we're so grateful for that relationship.
Yeah,
they do
he's
deserve
awesome.
a shout out. The Real Talk Golf Classic, by the way, if you don't yet have your tickets, goes
you ready?
Thursday, June 20th. You can go to ryanjesperson.com, click on the events link, and that's where you'll find the Real Talk Golf Classic at the Ranch Golf and Country Club. We're already half sold out, which is awesome.
There we go.
With about, 9-10 weeks to go. This fundraiser, of course, all funds raised. And thanks to our title and presenting sponsors, CWB Wealth. We do have room for other partnerships, but our title sponsor, CW Wealth, ensuring that post-secondary students that have lost a parent to cancer will benefit with the assistance of the Real Talk Julie Rohr Scholarship. And right now, we're really proud and honored, humbled to be supporting the post-secondary journeys of 3 different students, all from Alberta, though the scholarship is open across the country. These 3 are from the province of Alberta, and that's thanks to our golfers, our volunteers, and our sponsors, and our title sponsor, CWB Wealth. Today's a great day to enter your foursome for the Real Talk Golf Classic.
Great cause, great day. Dilly Bar Shooters, hole-in-one contest, big. I bring it up every time, but I can't believe it happened last year. Someone hit a hole-in-one.
Robert Cardinal. Yeah,
so.
The only thing I feel bad for Robert Cardinal about, I don't have his picture handy, but he just unbelievable. This guy, he just nailed his club selection. It was like 165 yards. I think he hit a 6-iron. He said bounced twice and in. And the only thing that was kind of lousy for Robert, and it's not really lousy at all, is that we struck a check, not out of the charitable fundraising, by the way. We insure our hole-in-one holes. So it didn't come out of the funds raised, but a check for $20,000.
Yeah.
And that, unfortunately, last year was the final year that will ever happen, because starting this year, every hole-in-one hole at the Real Talk Golf Classic will carry a $100,000 prize.
Ooh, how is that unfortunate? That's amazing.
No, I'm saying that Robert, had he hit his hole-in-one this year, would be walking away with $100,000.
I'm sure he's practicing.
I'm sure he's doing okay with this $20,000, and it was nice to see him get that check. I felt like it was like, like what pardon the golf talk for a second here, but what Scotty Scheffler was doing. You remember on 11 at the Masters on Sunday, and that remarkable shot he hit that came back, and you remember the crowd just went nuts. Like, that was what you and I heard from a couple of 100 yards away on the golf course when Robert just put that one right in the hole. It was,
I didn't know that guy. Is he like 27?
Robert?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I don't like to guess people's ages.
No. The guy who won the Masters.
Oh, Scotty Scheffler.
Yeah.
He's 27.
It looks like.
Yeah, he looks a little older. Yeah.
I was like,
it's kind of like Evan Bouchard, the Oilers defenseman. He looks like he's 45, but he's like 25.
After he won, I went down the Wikipedia rabbit hole. I'm like, this guy's 27.
I heard
golf
something
age
interesting.
you faster?
Did you know
because...
with Scheffler and Colin Morikawa playing in that foursome together, or probably in the final pairing is what I mean. They were the first. That was the first time that 2 major winners were paired together in the final pairing on a Masters Sunday while still in their 20s.
Wow.
So 2 major winners under the age of 30 for the first time since 1965 when it was Jack Nicklaus and Gary Player.
Wow.
How cool is that?
27. Looks 42.
Poor Morikawa. I feel like he's still seeing that water shot. in his dream, in his nightmares. Anyway, so every Thursday, our friends at the Discourse, that's Cheryl Oates and Erica Baruti's, release a new episode of their weekly political podcast. It has skyrocketed to success. It's one of the most downloaded political podcasts in the country, and an unprecedented moment in the episode released today. This is April 19th. You can check it out on YouTube. Go ahead and subscribe to their channel, or make sure that you subscribe to the Discourse wherever you get your podcasts. Erica Baruti's, the founding president of the United Conservative Party, Erica Baruti's former principal secretary to Premier Danielle Smith, agrees with Rachel Notley on Bill 18.
Rachel Notley, take it for the record that I semi-agree with you, because I have concerns that this actually does add red tape.
Essentially, what this government will be doing is wrapping each and every municipality across this province in a spool of red tape as they struggle to make up for the significant funding shortfalls created by this provincial government.
It adds bureaucracy.
Like funding to universities, because the province is worried that the universities might move forward with a research program that goes against UCP ideology.
I think the government is, walking a fine line right now. The tone that maybe is missed by this government is we want a seat at the table. We want to be a part of those discussions.
Wow.
Okay.
I never thought I'd see the day.
Well, so you just wonder, and I'm most interested in my conversations with conservative friends. It's kind of funny when I bring this to the table. I never know who wants their name used on the show and who doesn't want their name used. So let me just say, I'll use his first name, Jeff with a G. Yeah. You know who you are, Jeff. And I was talking to him just the other day, and his concern on this is that, and he's about as big a conservative supporter as it gets, and a great guy and a good friend. But his concern is that this Bill 18 will give the government, the Danielle Smith UCP government, the reputation of actually creating more red tape, creating more government bureaucracy, creating the need for more oversight, which could slow the process, which is kind of the exact opposite of what you would expect from the so-called, libertarian, small government, lean government approach that you might expect from Danielle Smith. So
our live chat just going off right now. Justin says, has hell frozen over? 80s family says, I'm going to need a minute to comprehend this.
Yes, I know. And so Johnny produces that show, The Discourse, and just a bit of sort of behind the scenes. I'm working in my office, and I turned on my monitor in the office so I could hear them recording. I was listening to it live as they were putting it down, the episode. And I heard that. I heard that she agrees with Notley, and I had to walk to the glass door and look in and go. But that's kind of what I think makes a podcast like The Discourse so good, is that you Oates has everything on her sleeve, cards on the table. Cheryl Oates was Rachel Notley's director of communications for the entire time she was premier. Cheryl Oates was a senior member of Notley's team when they went from 4 seats to 54 and saw it all the way through, worked with her even after 2019 when they lost that election. So Oates, you know where she's coming from. Baruti's, as I said 2 minutes ago, you obviously know where she's coming from. So you're going to get analysis from people where you go, okay, this is their career history. This is kind of who they chum with. This is how they come at issues. But you never know when they're going to surprise you and say, hey, this might actually be a good idea from the other team, or this might be kind of a bad idea or a risky idea from my team. And that's what I think makes that podcast so interesting. I don't want to listen to I don't know about you. I don't want to listen to podcasts where it's bias-free, opinion-free, lukewarm, tepid, no one takes a position. You want to get that from some sources of journalism. You go, I just want the analysis. Just give me the numbers, just give me the breakdown. But if I'm listening to a talk show, an opinion-based podcast, or an episode on YouTube, I want people to have their takes. I understand that people's perspectives will be shaped by what they do for work, how they grew up, people they know, issues that impact their families. Somebody that has a child fighting leukemia is going to care way more about investments in children's health than somebody who's dealing with their dad who's 91 and has dementia and is seeing his supports dry up, right? And those are just healthcare examples. But that's why I think the Discourse is catching on in a big way.
Yeah, Sylvia says right here, it's refreshing to see Erica being less partisan. Well, if you want to hear more of it and the whole thing, go right now to thediscourse.com, or you can find it on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts.
Love it. Who was it? Was it Kimberly? Kimberly says the real tragedy I was saying for Robert Cardinal that he won the 20 grand instead of 100 grand. She goes, maybe that he didn't win a car. Kimberly, FYI. So there's 4 par 3. I know I'm talking a lot about the Golf Classic. I'm just excited. It's the best golf tournament in Edmonton, and you can tell all the other tournament organizers that we said that. There's no doubt about it. Who else has dilly bar shooters? Nobody is the answer. But there's 4 par 3s on the course that we treat as our hole-in-one prize. So there's 4 par 3s. 3 of them are for $100,000 each, and one of them will be for a new car.
A new
car. And last year, and of course they'll have first right of refusal. Yeah. We had St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge there representing, and they had a Ram 1500 there on the tee, or it was it was like some Jeep or something that was like worth like $85,000. So
this year it's an EV.
We're not messing around. That'd be kind of cool. Get
right?
one of those. Yeah. What are those?
Ford Lightning.
Yeah, maybe.
Those are great.
Maybe. I'm trying. What's it? Not Civian or something? What are those EV trucks that everybody loves? I sound like an idiot now, but
sorry, Ford Lightning's full
Civian,
electric. Yeah.
Rivians, electric adventure vehicles. Have you seen these things?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I saw a Rivian pulling in. Our studio is right across the street from Rogers Place.
I love the grills because there's
and
no
I saw
grill.
a Rivian pulling in the other day, and I thought, I wonder which oiler it is that's driving that Rivian. That's a nice rig. Maybe we'll have to give one of those away. We'll see. I'm committing to something way beyond what I'm prepared to commit to right now. Thanks to Tracy for the shout out, who says another great episode of Real Talk. Hey, if you agree with Tracy, go ahead and smash that like button for us, will ya? If you don't already subscribe to us on YouTube, here's your call to action. It takes half a second. Please do so. And thanks for rating and reviewing our podcast. That really means a lot to us. For those of you that add the 5 stars and tell us why, perfect. Somebody added a 1-star rating the other day. Let me know why. Perfect. As long as you're engaged, as long as you give a rip, there's always going to be a home for you here at Real Talk. Now, coming up on tomorrow's episode, that's April 19th, a bit of a change of pace. We brought you a Real Talk Roundtable earlier this week, so we're going one-on-one with somebody who's super annoyed at me. Well, at least that's what her team is implying. They don't think that I've treated her fairly in my commentary. And so that's why we'll go one-on-one with Alberta NDP leadership candidate Kathleen Ganley, who says she still believes she can win this thing. She's going to tell us why in an exclusive.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson.